The quick actions of 8-year-old Madi Pulk are being credited with saving the life of her 5-year-old brother John in northern Minnesota. On March 30th, a little after 5 p.m., 4 of the 5 Polk family siblings, Maddie 8, Emily 7, and twin brothers John and Henry 5, were using long sticks to pretend fishing for ice chunks in a ditch near their home just north of Strathcona. Moving from Wanaska to this home in December, none of the children had seen the landscape around their home without snow, including the other side of the ditch where they were pretend fishing. But on this day, they had that chance. Maddie had started back to the house, and Emily would begin to do the same. But John and Henry stayed back, wanting to get that last fish before it eventually floated into the culvert. Wanting to get closer to the water, John would step on what he thought were sticks, but they weren't. They were actually pieces of debris from the fields that had washed down into the culvert and were floating on the water. John fell into the drainage ditch, moving at least 5 miles per hour, estimated John's father, Andrew. And John would get swept into the culvert. The journey to save John's life would begin, headed by his sister Maddie, one that proved successful. Henry had watched his brother fall into the water. He saw John's head pop up back above the water and then saw him spin down the swirly, where the water spun and kicked him through the culvert and to the other side of it. Henry went to the other side and saw John's head come up again. He then yelled for Emily, the closest sibling at the time. Emily came running back and went into the water to try and get John. Emily, said, "I couldn't reach him, Mom," and said the children's mom, Heidi, "I couldn't reach him." Emily yelled for Maddie, who was still walking back to the house at that time. Maddie turned around and came running back and told Emily to go into the house and get their mom. Maddie would take off her pink Boggs boots to allow her to run faster. She got into the water and swam across the ditch to get to John. Unable to touch the bottom, she knew how to swim, having attended swimming lessons in Greenbush. It's really deep, and the water's very cold, Maddie later said about the ditch. She would pull him out of the water from the hoodie of his coat and onto the other side of the ditch, the field side, and sat him on a snowbank. Asked what was going through her mind when she pulled John out of the ditch, Maddie said, "I was scared if he was going to die or something like that." John would lay there unresponsive and would not be wearing his own bog boots at the time due to them being pulled off by the force of the water. Maddie then began performing CPR. He literally had died. He had nothing there. His boots just fell right off his feet, Heidi said. With his boots, that's like his biggest prized possession. So that's probably from what John remembers at this point, that his biggest traumatic thing is that he lost his boots. So that's coming from a 5-year-old. Heidi would be in the house with her eldest daughter, Sarah, 11, and Andrew would be out working in the field when Emily came into the house. Heidi first explained how Emily can be a bit dramatic by nature. She couldn't hear what Emily was saying right away when she came into the house, focused on the fact that she was wet from head to toe. She's like, he's drowning. And I'm like, well, what puddle are you in? Because they always play. And so then all of a sudden again, I said, well, what puddle are you in? What are you talking about? And she said, the ditch, Heidi said. And at that point, I didn't have socks or shoes on, literally in my bare feet. And we just took off and ran as fast as we could down to the gravel. On their way to John, about halfway down the driveway, Heidi told Sarah to go back to the house and get Heidi's phone. After about a minute of Mandy giving CPR, John coughed up water and regained consciousness. When Heidi arrived on the scene, John's eyes were open, but not focused on anything. He was beginning to moan, but wasn't responsive to anything Heidi was saying. He was so cool. He was just absolutely ice cold, and he was just so wet. Well, obviously. But so I picked him up and brought him up closer to the road just to get him off the snowbank, Heidi said. Then my daughter Sarah met me right on the side of the road and called 911. I had set him down and I called 911. The 911 operator told her to get John warm. Directing her children to get some blankets, they returned with a black garden wagon full of them. They wrapped him up in blankets and wheeled him up into the house before the ambulance arrived. The Greenbush ambulance picked him up and met up with and switched him into the Roseau ambulance. During his trip to Roseau, medical personnel did stabilize John. Once in the Roseau hospital, John was warmed up and given oxygen. He was still really quiet, and for people that know him, he's not a quiet kid. He's extremely inquisitive, always asking questions, always asking questions, Heidi said. Not to be annoying or frustrating, because he is just very curious. That is probably part of the situation, is that he's just such a curious kid. They eventually gave him a chest x-ray and discovered that he had aspirated water and other particles in his lungs, called aspiration pneumonia. He was admitted to the hospital, and medical personnel decided on the best plan for him moving forward, deciding to take him to Sanford Hospital in Fargo. He was stable at that moment, but with the aspiration pneumonia, it was going to get bad or take a turn for the worse. It could happen very quickly, Heidi said. So they wanted him as close to possible to a pediatric ICU. That's why the decision was made to take him to Fargo. He arrived at Sanford in the early morning hours on March 31st. At 11 a.m. that day, they did another scan. The medical personnel said, "Well, you're not going to believe this, but this is actually the result we wanted and weren't expecting until tomorrow," Heidi said. But everything had cleared up quickly. By about 1 p.m., less than 24 hours since his accident, John was headed home. An ER doctor at Sanford was very much in the loop on John's case the entire time, even when he was in Roseau, Heidi explained. When they had gotten him down to Sanford, the emergency doctor had come in to see for himself, Heidi said. And he was very clear to my husband, just so you understand, this is not how these situations end. He goes, I needed to see this because this whole situation, just between the stats and the story of how everything played out, to be able to see him laugh and joking and giggling, that is not how these cases end. The doctor pointed to the importance of getting individuals breathing as soon as possible in drowning situations to prevent future deficits. Madi starting CPR as soon as possible was primarily the reason as to why he came back quickly as he did, Heidi said. At this point, there is zero deficits as far as any issues, long-term issues. How did this 8-year-old know CPR? She had seen many of the Grey's Anatomy shows, a medical drama TV series that her mom watches. My husband always gave me such a hard time about my obsession with Grey's Anatomy, Heidi said. And after this whole situation, I don't think he's going to be giving me a hard time anymore about watching it. Madi also learned CPR from the Riverside Lutheran Church in Wanaska. Through a grant program courtesy of Life Care, the church received an AED machine. As part of this program, the church had training courses on how to use the machines, including video info on CPR. Being her mom was a secretary at the church, Madi was there when this info was being played. Asked about her feelings in terms of knowing her action saved her brother's life, she said, "Happy because he's okay and he's alive." Finding out the impact of her daughter's actions left Heidi overwhelmed, but was also very proud and excited to see how she uses this honest gift in the future. I would love to see her in the future use that talent and gift she has in an amazing manner as far as being interested in the medical field, Heidi said. The future she has is so bright, and you know, when you can see things that come naturally in your child's life, it's pretty amazing. She just naturally had the instinct of what to do and how to do it to keep her composure. Today, one would never be able to tell that anything happened to John physically or emotionally. By Wednesday, he was outside playing again. We were just sitting at the table, and he had this Play-Doh, and he had his tractors that he was running through the Play-Doh, Heidi said. And all of a sudden, he looked up and he goes, "You know, Mom, that x-ray machine, that wasn't scary," and then went on playing again. Heidi explained despite the final outcome, her children understand the magnitude of this event. This was definitely a trauma that happened. It's a very serious situation. And all of our kids are very much aware what could have happened. And so this is going to be a long healing process on that side of things. She does appreciate all the support, prayers, and comments her family has received from the community. From this story, Heidi hopes people will learn the following lessons: not to take anything for granted, know whether their children understand what it is to do in emergencies, and most of all, love their children and hug them every day. Right now, our surroundings are changing very quickly. We are telling our kids to go out and play for recess. We all kind of stuck with this. We're all kind of stuck with this coronavirus thing, Heidi said. But at the same time, we need to make sure that our children are safe. But also above that, just understand that our children are pretty amazing and they can do some amazing things right now. As for those boots Henry lost, well, they're still missing. But he has made a request for mossy oak camouflage boots. He's not a fan of hot pink boots he recently had to wear. He's like, well, at least I get a new pair of boots, Mom. And I'm like, oh, for goodness sakes, Heidi said. It makes you smile and makes you appreciate the goodness of the story and just kind of reminds all of us this happened to kids. I'm Neil Carlson reporting for PageOnePublications.com.